So welcome everybody to our map adoption process presentation. This is a new presentation. We've never done this one before, so bear with us if there's a little difficulties here and there, but yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Isabel Bialis. I'm an NFIP specialist here, and I'm joined by Anna.
Hi, I am Anna Christ. I'm an outreach and NFIP coordinator here at the state. So we will be going over the map adoption process today. Bella will start us off.
Our agenda for today, we'll start with map adoption. What does it mean? What are they? Then we'll move into the floodplain mapping process. Next, how to adopt new maps, things to consider during the mapping process, and any questions you have at the end. What is a map adoption? So a map adoption is when, screen keeps changing, is when NFIP communities officially reference their effective flood insurance rate map panels in their floodplain management ordinance. So you can see an example on the screen. That's the paragraph from our model ordinance. And in there, they reference the panels, those long 10 or so digit numbers, and then have their effective date afterwards. Map adoptions are required when a community is receiving new flood insurance rate map panels or a new flood insurance study. The flood ordinance must reference the new panel numbers and dates before the effective date of these new maps. And this is required to maintain good standing within the NFIP. Just here's a list of our current mapping projects or ones that are approaching completion. I have quite a few on here that are already in there. The 6-month window of adoption, and then some that haven't started yet. And if you're unfamiliar, this is what a firm panel looks like. They are the official maps from FEMA that show a community's flood risk. These can be viewed in FEMA's Map Service Center. They also have the Flood Insurance Study Index that shows you all of the firm panels that a community may have. As some are big enough that they have more than one, they cross those boundaries. It used to be able that you could just reference the index within your ordinance, but that is not allowed anymore. FEMA likes all individual panels to be listed out one by one, but the index is still a good reference to have. On the Map Service Center, you can find them if you go to the website, which you can find in our digital desk reference, I believe. And then if you go to search all products, then it'll come up with some drop-down lists where you put in your state, your county, and your community. And then it'll show you all the effective products, if you have any preliminary products, and if you have any pending products. They'll show up in the preliminary products once there are preliminary maps out, but once they reach that 6-month adoption window, then pending folder. Hard copies will also be mailed at the completion of a mapping project, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but you also should retain those hard copies as well. You can also find more information on our interactive map. We have a new interactive map actually that is available. It should be a lot faster, more reliable. Our layers are maintained and stored in-house. There's more consistency with connectivity. It's just overall a lot better and a cleaner look. So here you can see the splash page with disclaimers no longer appears right up front. When you open the map, it's over here to the side. And there's also the layers and the legend and map guidance on that left panel. The toolbar is in that top left area, that has the points, drawing polygons, measuring distances, they're all up there. And when you use the search bar, you need to select from a drop-down in order to zoom to the location. So you'll type it in, it'll appear, and then you click on it. And for some reason, you have to click twice on that name, and then it'll take you to your desired location. And here you can also see the layer breakdown a bit more. Within the National Flood Hazard layer, you have the regulatory floodplain. Then you can also view pending maps if they're available and preliminary maps if they're available. You can also view flood awareness areas, which aren't as official as preliminary and pending maps, but they can give you a really good idea of where the floodplain might change or where boundaries are more accurately at. You can also view your effective paper map layer, but that is only in communities that is still effective for. They don't show up in communities that have newer maps. So, moving on to the floodplain mapping process. So we'll turn it over to Anna.
Well, now we'll get into more of just a detailed breakdown of the step-by-step process of what happens when it's announced that your community is getting new maps. So this is the official risk map timeline. The risk map is just the official title when it's decided that FEMA is, or in Nebraska, the state will do that, is providing your community with new maps or developing those new maps. The project is decided based on several different factors. It's on floodplain risk in the community, available data. If your community has really old maps, hasn't had an update in a while, that will be more of a priority community to get maps updated. If there's more development, increased population, all of those different factors will go into when a mapping update will occur. You don't have to memorize this timeline. This is something that takes place over several years. It takes a long time to develop these maps. So, and we at the state are always involved. You're getting tons of notifications throughout the whole process when these next steps will take place. So we'll kind of break it down even further and go into more detail with each of these steps. So this is kind of the map of what this process will look like. We'll start out with data discovery. All the blue dots are just different milestones throughout the process. You can see there's data discovery, the map production itself, when the maps go preliminary, and then towards the end when they become finalized. Their red dots are all community meetings. So these are typically hosted by us at the state, where we will coordinate with your community, set up a time that works best for the majority people of the public, where we can come in, talk about the mapping update process, give you updates, receive comments, and just answer questions as things are happening. And then the two yellow markers show the different opportunities that you can provide feedback on the maps. So there's the initial 30-day comment period where the maps are still in a draft phase, and providing comments is really simple. And then once they go preliminary, you have the 90-day appeals period. Those comments are a lot more trickier to apply. They have to be an official appeal, and then they have to have scientific data for these comments. So we'll talk about those more further. And then, of course, at the end, you have the letter of final determination, which marks the finalization of the maps and the 180-day period where you have to adopt the maps. So first, we'll start out with just some expectations of the community during this time. For the floodplain administrator and community leadership, it's really important that you are attending these meetings that are hosted by the state or organized by your community. And it's important that you're promoting these to the public. We want as many people as possible to participate in these meetings so that everybody can be prepared and know what changes are going to be happening with the floodplain. It's important that you keep property owners aware throughout the process. Make sure you know what letters of map change you have in your community, which ones might be affected by the change in the maps, who might be required to purchase flood insurance with these mapping changes, and just the different parts of your town that are going to be impacted by the floodplain. If there are certain demographics, certain types of buildings, if they are residential or commercial buildings that are going to be either added or removed to the floodplain. Just have a good understanding of what your current floodplain looks like and what might be changed with these mapping updates. And then, of course, it's your responsibility to update or adopt the maps via an ordinance update when the time comes. So at project kickoff, your main responsibility is to provide the state, if we are the ones that are doing the mapping project, work with us to provide us information about your community that will go into creating these maps. So your corporate boundaries, if you have any inaccuracies that are shown on our current maps, if you've gone through any annexations, if you've adopted an ETJ, an extraterritorial jurisdiction, things like that we need to know so that we can incorporate those into the new maps. If you have any topographies, surveys, elevation data that could be useful for the mapping project, that would be something that you would provide to us. If you have any new construction, design as built information for stream crossing structures, those would be important for the mapping update. And then any historical data, high water marks, those will also be taken into account. So any information that can be provided, you know your community better than we do. So it's important to be hands-on at the very beginning of the process. And again, this is where you want to start your preliminary public outreach. At this time, you'll want to make sure that your floodplain maps are accessible. That could be just letting your community members know where they can find the maps, either like Isabella stated, on the FEMA's Map Service Center or on our interactive map. Or if you have paper copies, you could do that. If you have specific property owners that are interested in what the floodplain boundaries look like around their property, you have the ability to print off smaller, more specific maps straight from our interactive map. Send out reminders of the existing boundaries to your community members, contacting those who are already in the floodplain or those who are close to the existing boundaries, letting them know what their current status is and making them aware that there will be changes happening in the future. You could also host your own local community meetings if you would like our help with that. Feel free to contact us and we can try to make something work where we are available to help answer questions as needed. And then, of course, reviewing properties with effective letters of map changes, letting them know that they do have a current letter of map change on their property and that the status of that could be affected with the upcoming mapping change. And then just making sure as the floodplain administrator that your contact information is available, making sure people know who you are and that you are available to answer questions. It's just important to know that, know what your current flood risk is, what your current floodplain looks like, and just be available to answer questions with that. So with all of that at the start of a new mapping project, you'll want to check in with any new developments, see if there's any flood mitigation projects that will be taking place in your community that could affect the new maps. Any new developments, they may not be in a current regulatory floodplain that has floodplain requirements, but if they are anywhere near the floodplain boundaries, they could be incorporated, which may have floodplain regulations or flood insurance requirements applied upon them. So make sure you're staying in contact with them, keeping them updated with that, and then keeping your governing body updated as well. They'll probably be getting a lot of questions about mapping updates as well, making sure that they're in the know. All right, so with the initial data development, again, you're going to want to engage your community leadership, letting them know, keeping them updated as the process gets started and as new information becomes available, as well as the property owners. And then this is the time where you would be coordinating with us at the state or whoever is conducting the mapping project. Since there are no drafts completed or drafts are just being developed, the data and the floodplain boundaries are easily adjusted. They don't require full studies, technical analysis to be edited. So this is the time where you really want to be hands-on and cooperative so that we can get these floodplain maps developed as accurately as possible and as quickly as we can. So this is also the start of the initial comment period. Again, this is the time where comments can be made on the floodplain maps before they go preliminary. And you should be reviewing the maps, the draft maps, as they become available to check for inaccuracies, because you know your community best. If there are things that don't look quite right, if you know the topography is a little bit different than what's showing up on the draft maps, let us know and we'll take another look at them to see what's going on there and if things can be made a little bit more accurate for you. If you don't review the maps, it could have a negative impact on your community and the residents. There could be individuals that are included in the floodplain boundaries that may not necessarily be in those boundaries, or there could be individuals that do actually fall within the floodplain boundaries and have flood risk and they are not knowledgeable or know that they should have floodplain insurance because the maps are inaccurate. So just keeping everybody up to date on what their flood risk actually is the most important part and why these maps are being created to promote that public safety. So again, this is when comments are easily incorporated at the maps before that appeals period that requires more hands-on work for that. So during this flood risk review period, the initial flood risk review meeting is a meeting that's set up with community officials and stakeholders where the draft work is presented. And again, the comments will start after this meeting. These maps should align with the information that has been provided by the community and the project area throughout the data development process. And this is where community officials can continue to comment and on these draft maps. After this period, these preliminary or these draft maps will be posted as they become available, and communities can go on and provide those comments. After the initial comment period opens up, this will be the time where we coordinate the public open house with the communities. We want to make sure that these mapping projects typically develop over counties. So we want to schedule these so the most amount of people can come to these meetings across the different communities. Us at the state will be available to show them the draft maps and answer any questions about floodplain insurance, floodplain regulations, any questions that community members might have that you may not know the answer to. So again, with this comment period, you can go onto our interactive map and provide comments. There are different buttons that you can click on that will show what your current floodplain looks like versus what the preliminary or the draft maps will look like. And you can insert comments, provide comments directly from the interactive map. Anybody in the community can do it. And this initial comment period after the flood risk review meeting will be for 30 days. After that 30 days, the maps will then go preliminary and the comment period will turn into more of the appeals process that we'll talk about. Okay, so after the 30-day comment period, the maps will go from a draft setting to a preliminary map setting. So they're moving towards finalization. Us at the state, or again, whoever is in charge of the mapping update will present the preliminary maps at what is called a consultation coordination officer meeting or a CCO meeting. This is between the state, floodplain administrator, and community leadership. That is encouraged that you attend. We will go over the mapping process again, what has occurred up until this point, and provide answers to any questions, updates to what the new maps will look like. And then any changes after this will require that technical or scientific data to make any changes to these maps. And that will be submitted during the 90-day appeals period. So during the preliminary phase is when the floodplain administrator or community officials will receive what's called a summary of map action, or a SOMA. This is a comprehensive list of all of the current effective letters of map change that are present within your community and the likely outcome of those letters of map change after the new maps become effective. So this letter is mailed to community officials only and is not provided to individual property owners. So this would be a big responsibility. You'd want to reach out to those property owners and let them know let them know they currently have a letter of map change and what the expected outcome is. You'll just want to be as transparent and communicative with them as possible so that they're aware of potential changes with that. So there are 4 different categories that are listed on the SOMA of 4 different outcomes for those letters of map change. The first category is that it is incorporated with these new maps. So this is typically with your larger letter of map revisions that actually change the floodplain boundaries or the actual maps. This is where the engineering data is actually incorporated into the new floodplain study. So the letter of map change technically goes away, but it stays changing the map and it's just incorporated into the new boundaries. The second category is not incorporated. So this is with smaller letter of map amendments or letter of map revisions based on fill that are too small to really see changes on the map, but based on the preliminary data, they're likely to be revalidated, so they'll stay the same. This is when the lowest adjacent grade or the lowest lot levels are above the preliminary base flood elevations. So they are elevated enough to where they will stay as a letter of map change. And then the third category is that the letter of map change is superseded. So this is for letters of map change that their lowest adjacent grade or lowest lot elevation is below the preliminary base flood elevation, so they are not elevated high enough, and will be suspected to be reincorporated into the floodplain. So with these properties, you'll absolutely want to make sure that you're contacting the property owners to let them know that their floodplain regulations will be placed back onto their property for any future developments, and the requirement for flood insurance will most likely affect them again. And then with category 4, this is to be redetermined. So this is for letters of map changes with multiple properties where at least one lot will no longer be valid. Typically, FEMA will have to redetermine in the future the status of this. So it's important that with these SOMAs, this is the expected outcome for all of the letters of map change. This is not the final determination. So just be aware of that. When you do get what's called the letter of final determination, this is the official issue that states the final outcome for, or once you reach the letter of final determination, this is where your floodplain maps become finalized. This is sent to all community leaders in the project area. It starts the 6-month period in which communities will be required to adopt the new maps into their floodplain ordinance in order to remain compliant with the National Flood Insurance Program. Here at the state, we will do the initial reviews of your floodplain ordinances to see if your current ordinance is compliant with current state and federal minimum regulations. If it is compliant, we will suggest doing what's called an ordinance amendment, where you will just be amending the area that identifies the floodplain maps. If there are some more issues with your floodplain ordinance, we'll most likely suggest drafting a new floodplain ordinance and fixing those issues along with adopting the new maps. And as we enter the letter of final determination period, you will get what's called the revalidation letter. And this is the official letter that lists the finalized determination on the outcome of those letter of map changes that were listed in the SOMA. So this becomes effective a day before the map, your maps become effective, and it will only list the letter of map changes that are still in effect with the new maps. So the letters of map change that were superseded and are no longer valid or were incorporated into the new maps will not be included on this letter. And again, this letter is only provided to your community leadership, so you want to share this information with the property owners and let them know what the finalized status of their letter of map change is. So just to summarize the regulatory process, so once the maps become preliminary, we'll have that CCO meeting and public open house where we coordinate with your communities to share the information and answer as many questions as possible. That will start afterwards, we'll start the appeals period, which is 90 days. And all these appeals or comments on the maps to make those changes will need to be based on scientific analysis and will be submitted by the community to FEMA. After that, you'll move on to the letter of final determination, which it's important to note that when you get the letter of final determination, I don't believe it states anywhere on the letter that it's the letter of final determination. It will just inform you that the mapping process is being finalized and remind you of that 6-month period where you have to adopt the new maps into your ordinance. And then after that, you have the effective date, which again is 6 months after that letter of final determination, where the flood insurance rate maps and your flood insurance study will become effective on that day. All right, I think.
So now we will talk about how to actually go about adopting the new maps, as we've been talking about. So again, the letter of final determination, or LFD, is sent to communities by FEMA through the mail. That'll show you which letters of map change are incorporated or invalidated on the new maps. And it opens that 6-month window in which the new maps must be adopted by either amendment or new ordinance. We at the state will contact the local floodplain administrator to let them know that this window is open. We'll also inform them of any violations in the current ordinance, like Anna talked about, that can be fixed as well during this amendment new ordinance period. So here's an overview of what the ordinance amendment adoption process looks like with the state. It can be either a longer process or a shorter process. It just kind of depends on what the community is looking for. But we'll go into the individual steps. First, we'll talk about amendments versus new ordinances. As Anna mentioned, amendments are really only used when the map references and other minor corrections need to be made. We're trying to move away from recommending amendments as our new model will be coming out soon, as many of you have probably heard about it. So with the new ordinance, when is used when communities are changing regulation levels with the new maps, maybe going from a B to a C or C to D, or when we find multiple or major issues within the current ordinance. So like I said, moving forward, we'll recommend everyone to use the new ordinance, our new model ordinance, as it'll be easier to ensure compliance throughout all the communities of Nebraska, as currently there's some cities that still have ordinances from 1970 that kind of make it difficult to keep in check. So we're just trying to keep everybody updated, and we think our new model is pretty slick and pretty good and will make managing your floodplain a lot easier. So here's just an amendment template. There's no set template or requirements from the state of Nebraska. We do have this template for the small revisions that you can use if your community does not already have their own amendment system, but don't feel like you have to use our amendment template. And like I said, we have our new model ordinance that we've been working on for over the past year. It's finally getting very close to release. We can actually say that now. We'll be testing it out with a few communities first before we release it for general use, but just know that the finish line is actually getting close this time. But we have some recorded trainings on our website if you're interested in hearing more about this ordinance, as there's a lot of changes to it and a lot of improvements. So when either doing this new ordinance or an amendment, the community board must agree on this first, on what path you would like to choose. The floodplain administrator or the board will put together a draft, and we at the state are more than happy to help with the drafting process or trying to help you decide whether you'd like to go with an amendment or a new ordinance. Once there is a draft put together by the community, you will then send it to us here at the state, where we will do our own review for compliance with the state standards, and then we send it on to FEMA for their review with national standards. FEMA will then return their comments to us, and we will return both our and FEMA comments back to the community. So if you're just doing an amendment, you must include the entire paragraph in the amendment, not just the firm panel numbers, as if you say the section of this ordinance will be amended and you just list out the panels, that's going to be the entire paragraph. So you're required to include the entire paragraph of the adoption into your amendment. So for the second draft, like I said, we will return our and or FEMA's necessary changes to the community. This can either be in the form of an email where we will bullet point out the different changes that need to be made,
or we might do comments on the Word document itself of the amendment or ordinance, or we may make the changes ourselves, but have a revision on so that if you can see on the right, it's in red and the community will need to right click and accept this insertion. Some people are just not familiar with that tool, so just wanted to point it out as if there's a lot of complicated little changes that need to be made, sometimes it's easiest for us to just put them into place, but have you review them and accept what we've changed. So once the comments from us and FEMA have been implemented, the community may proceed with adoption. If you'd like, you can send it back to us for another complete cross-check. Otherwise, you're free to move forward with adoption after implementing those changes. But once it's been adopted, a signed copy must be sent to us here at the state for our records, and then we will also send it to FEMA for their final review and filing within their system. So powers of the village board chairs. The chairperson of the village board or county board is required to have the ordinance of the village printed and published for the information of the inhabitants and carry out and ensure the ordinances are being used. The floodplain administrator is responsible for contents of the ordinance, but if a clerk is the FPA is not also the clerk, they may introduce the ordinance on behalf of the floodplain administrator. So here's just some information on reading and passages of ordinances and resolutions. So all ordinances and resolutions require for their passage or adoption the concurrence of a majority of all members elected to the city council or village board of trustees. It just has to be a majority of your elected officials, not necessarily a majority of a quorum. Ordinances of a general or permanent nature are read by title on 3 different days unless 3/4 of the city council or village board of trustees vote to suspend this requirement. If the requirement is suspended, then the ordinance is read by title and then moved for final passage. So it's very important to keep track of that timeline when you are looking at that 6-month period that you have to adopt these maps, as you don't want to just be introducing it at the very end and you only meet on a monthly basis, and then it'd be 3 more months until it can get passed if you don't waive that the reading rule. And as well, all ordinances before they take effect need to be published within 15 days after they are passed. This is either in a legal newspaper, in general circulation of the city or village, or by publishing it in a book or pamphlet form, or recently passed in 2021. This allows for publication of ordinances in electronic form, such as putting it on your community website. So I believe we'll move and we'll take over.
So now we'll just go into some additional things to consider during the ending of this process when you're updating your ordinance. So like Isabella mentioned, it's important to keep in mind those effective dates. Most ordinances will go into effect 15 days after their passage. So for communities that are adopting your new floodplain maps, it's important to ensure that the ordinance is going effective by the firm effective date. So you want to stay on top of the ordinance amendment or adoption process so that you're not falling behind and that 15 days goes into effect after your new maps go effective. Just keeping that timeline in mind is going to be extremely important. If your community does not adopt these maps before that effective date, that puts you at risk for suspension with the NFIP through FEMA. So you'll want to make sure that you stay on top of that. For emergency ordinances, that is allowed in cases of like extreme impending danger, riots, failure of public utility, things like that. Those ordinances will typically take effect on the upon the proclamation of the mayor or village board chair. So in extreme instances, you can get around that 15-day effective date, but it's better to just stay proactive, go through the amendment or the ordinance adoption process as early as possible so that we avoid any issues with that effective date. And then additionally, like we said, we'll do a review of your ordinance to see if there are any minor issues or major issues that need to be addressed. But along with that, now is the time where you're either making small updates to your current ordinance or drafting a new one to consider adding in higher standards. So these are regulations that go above and beyond state and federal minimum standards, and they're just better practices to help protect your community from flood risk. This includes, for example, a 2-foot freeboard instead of the state minimum standard, which is a 1-foot freeboard. This could be prohibiting all types of development in certain flood risk areas like a floodway, prohibiting certain types of development in different flood risk zones, adding additional flood risk regulations to your critical facilities, things like that, that will put your community at a better spot for flood safety. Our new model has an entire list of higher or optional standards at the very end in the higher standards guide. It's formatted to has the language available so you can plug it directly into your draft ordinance and it fits neatly in there. It comes with a description of what the higher optional standard is and then instructions on how to plug that into your ordinance. We are really excited about this feature with our new model. Our current model, the optional or higher standards are just plugged directly into the model ordinance and highlighted in blue. So it makes it just a little clunky and cluttered and can have some issues if you are taking some of that out with the numbering system. So we think this way will be a lot more user-friendly and just be a lot more helpful when you're actually developing your new ordinance. So keep an eye out for that when you do go through an ordinance update and use our new model. Again, when you're adopting and already making changes to your ordinance, it's a great time to reevaluate your interest in these higher standards. And then it's a great time for community planning. This would be a great time to update if you have a comprehensive plan to account for your new floodplain boundaries. If you have any current or you're interested in doing mitigation projects to protect flood-prone areas in your town, having those new boundaries will affect any of those plans. And then just review your whole program as a whole. This is a great time to create or update your written permitting procedures. We are coming out we'll have available a few new model permitting options. So going through an update like that, as you're going through the mapping update process, writing down all of the responsibilities and things that you've done throughout the whole process to create an administrative procedure for future floodplain administrators in your community could be extremely helpful. Reintroducing your floodplain ordinance and floodplain regulations to your community leadership or your community members. It's a great time to strategize community outreach. A mapping update is when floodplain regulations and floodplain risks are on the top of everybody's mind in your community. It's a great time to do outreach for floodplain insurance availability and regulations, flood safety tips, flood preparedness tips, or just as the floodplain administrator to get your name and contact information out there. So it'll set your community up for better success for flood safety in the future. The end of this presentation. We're ending a little bit short, but we do want to take the time to plug our social media platforms. We post a lot of information about upcoming trainings, flood insurance information, flood safety information. So there's just a lot of good information available for that. Also, check out our website. We have our training page where we post upcoming training opportunities, and you can register directly from there. We also post old training videos on our training page and YouTube. So definitely check that out if you have free time, or if you have any questions that need to be answered, or just a refresh on different topics.